My topic is Egyptian art, and I'm going to start with ancient Egyptian art. Egyptian culture has a very rich history of art, and we all are very familiar with the iconic images of architecture, from the Sphinx to the pyramids. What's incredible about their art is that it stayed constant throughout all the runs of the kingdoms and dynasties, with very little change in style. This is because ancient artists were prescribed a very specific set of guidelines for the look of the art. All the proportions were calculated out to specific guidelines. The point of Egyptian art was not for expression or individualism. It was symbolic and heavily integrated into the religion and afterlife. The art of ancient Egypt collected themes mostly representing gods or the pharaoh, who was a god on earth. The art that still exists today is mainly in stone of ancient buildings because of age and decay. But there are some other forms such as papyrus and wall paintings that survive because of the arid conditions in Egypt. Art in Egypt, ancient Egypt, was symbolic, had many creatures and color-related symbols of gods or sacred things. Like green and blue represent the Nile and life. And ancient Egyptian art can be classified by period and by form. The main Egyptian periods are pre-dynastic Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Amarna period, and Ptolemaic. Egyptian art took many forms, but in every form they always obeyed one law, the mode in which they represented man, nature, and the environment, as they had for thousands of years. It was in a tradition. Papyrus is one form. The word paper comes from papyrus, and it is a plant cultivated in the Nile that was turned into papyrus sheets. Some rolls were found that are up to 10 meters long. The technique was lost but rediscovered by Egyptologists in the 1940s. Pottery in ancient Egypt was created not in the way we think of pottery today. It was created with stellite rock and was carved with various images of deities or into amulets or vases, and the rock was then covered with enamel. Sculpture is another form. Most ancient sculptures depicted gods or Egyptian pharaohs and were always common in the way they treated the man over the woman. The man was always a bigger form than the woman and a darker skin color. Hieroglyphs was their written form of language, but it also is art because of the form it came in. The symbols that Egyptian lettering symbolized were actually little pictures in themselves, and sometimes stood alone or with combinations could create words. The tricky thing about hieroglyphs is that they can be written left to right, right to left, or up and down. The last form is ancient painting. Because of the arid conditions, Egyptian paintings are still to be found in temples and tombs, and they mostly depicted the afterlife, the activities of life, but how they would be progressively integrated into the afterlife. Showed the deceased happy and having a good time. And these are the forms we generally think of when we think of Egyptian art. We think of the ancient forms, but there's a whole new movement in Egypt derived around modern art. And modern art is what's happening today and since the turn of the century. At the turn of the century, Egypt finally got independence from all the invaders, and they declared themselves as a modern nation. So as an expression of that, the artists and art that came out of there became their national identity. And even though Egypt followed a lot of Western thought and ideas in art, such as surrealism, cubism, Dadaism, and abstractism, they started with a root of pharaonic art, which is like based off of the old styles and look of the art of ancient Egypt or the pharaohs. And this was their unique calling card. And most of Egyptian art, even though it follows after Western ideas, is very rooted in everyday life, depicting everyday life, and the spirit and heart of the Egyptian people. They are now known as the center for Arab art, not only in painting and figurative art, but also in photography, and they are the center of Arab cinema. So that's my overview of Egyptian art.